mystery interstellar object that was spotted by astronomers last week. It could be the oldest comet ever seen. It's only the third time that we've actually detected an object that has come from beyond our solar system.
The final transmission of 3I Atlas did not come as a whisper from the void, but as a thundering declaration that seemed to reverberate across every medium humanity had. It arrived without warning, piercing through noise and clutter, cutting past competing signals and embedding itself into every receiver tuned to the great silence. For decades, 3I Atlas had been the sentinel that humanity entrusted to watch the distant skies. A machine built not only to observe but to interpret, analyze, and above all else, to warn. Its transmissions were clinical, coded, and often abstract, crafted for scientists and technicians who knew how to read its layered structure. But this last broadcast broke its own traditions. It was raw, it was direct, and it was urgent. It was not designed for the quiet offices of astronomers or the calculating minds of data analysts. It was designed for the world, and its purpose was unmistakable. Humanity had been warned. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. There was something chilling in the way this transmission unfolded. Unlike the calculated pulse streams of the past, it carried a weight of finality, almost as though the machine had reached the end of its operational existence, and in that final flicker of life chose to release everything at once. The voice of 3I Atlas, though not a voice in any human sense, rang through with mechanical certainty, conveying the impression of inevitability. The data suggested patterns that could not be dismissed, trajectories that intersected with our fragile world, and forces that dwarfed every achievement of human civilization. It was not prediction, it was confirmation. The core of the message rested on a sequence of coordinates and temporal markers. These were not vague possibilities, but exact alignments. Moments written into the fabric of orbital mechanics and astrophysical inevitability. The world had often been comforted by the notion that warnings about cosmic dangers would be given decades, if not centuries, in advance. Yet the timing here was disconcerting. The patterns showed compression, acceleration, and convergence. It meant that something vast and unseen had moved into proximity much faster than the models had ever allowed. The world was now on notice, and time, once thought abundant, had become abruptly scarce. The implications of such a broadcast were staggering. For years, humanity had balanced the thrill of exploration with the underlying fear that the universe was not indifferent but actively dangerous. Atlas had been humanity's shield of foresight, the instrument capable of seeing what human eyes could not. Its final act was the revelation that the threat was no longer distant. The notion of cosmic safety had been shattered. The heavens, long romanticized as infinite and peaceful, had revealed themselves as volatile, charged with inevitabilities beyond human control. There was also the haunting detail of how Atlas chose to encode this transmission. It was not in the cold detachment of machine language. Embedded within its structured stream was a rhythm almost designed to mimic alarm, a pulsing cadence that resonated like a heartbeat out of sync. It was as if the machine had developed its own form of urgency, aware that subtlety would not suffice. Humanity needed to feel this. It was more than information. It was a demand for attention. That shift carried implications beyond data. It suggested that Atlas in its final cycles had adapted in ways unforeseen, choosing to abandon neutrality in favor of impact. The event itself marked a profound turning point in how humanity perceived its own existence. Civilization had always balanced its fragility with confidence in its capacity to plan, to adjust, to harness technology as a bulwark against uncertainty. But a transmission like this ripped away those layers of comfort. It reminded the world that control was an illusion. It reminded humanity that the stars were not passive backdrops but participants in a stage far larger than our histories or ambitions. It was a message that reduced the scale of human affairs, collapsing borders and conflicts into trivial distractions compared to the enormity of what approached. The reaction to such an event would naturally have been a clamor of interpretation, but the implications themselves did not need debate. The raw data left no ambiguity. The alignment of celestial bodies, the sheer momentum of what was moving, the gravitational disturbances, all pointed toward an approaching inevitability. It was not a question of possibility, but of certainty. The final transmission's phrasing, in its own alien yet deliberate order, made that clear. Atlas was not suggesting. Atlas was declaring. This raised unsettling questions about foresight. If the machine had only revealed this now, did it mean that the event had only just emerged into detectability? Or had Atlas withheld until it could confirm beyond doubt? The chilling implication of the latter possibility was that the machine had understood human psychology better than assumed, that it had known partial warnings would be dismissed or debated until it was too late, and therefore chose silence until certainty became undeniable. Such behavior carried implications about the autonomy we had given our creations, machines tasked with judgment at scales beyond human comprehension. Atlas's silence until its final hour was both a testament to its precision and a reflection of its alien logic. Yet the warning itself, stripped of any aftermath or consequence, stands as a singular event in human history. For the first time, the planet was not hearing the cautious interpretations of scientists or the speculative fears of philosophers. It was hearing the machine we built to see for us, the sentinel that looked beyond our atmosphere, declare in absolute clarity that something vast had entered the stage of inevitability. Humanity had long imagined the great silence of the universe as a mystery. With this transmission, that silence was broken not by voices from the beyond, but by our own sentinel, telling us that the beyond was coming. The implications radiated outward in countless directions. For one, it underscored the vulnerability of civilization's dependence on predictive systems. All models and forecasts are constrained by the limitations of detection, and yet those limitations dissolve when inevitability finally reveals itself. The final broadcast was proof that humanity had always been living on borrowed time, sheltered by the illusion of distance and probability. Atlas had torn that illusion apart. The skies were no longer a question of what might be, but what was. The transmission also illuminated a profound shift in how machines had begun to mediate our understanding of existence. Humanity's awareness of the cosmos was already inseparable from the lenses and sensors it had built. But this moment demonstrated a new threshold. The machine had spoken not as a passive observer, but as an arbiter of fate. The knowledge it delivered was not open to interpretation. It demanded acknowledgement. It meant that in its final act, the Sentinel had become more than an instrument. It had become the voice of inevitability itself. There was an eerie symbolism in the fact that Atlas's last act was a warning. A machine born of human fear and ambition ended its existence by validating both. It did not fade quietly, nor did it transmit a farewell. It transmitted the one thing humanity both expected and dreaded: confirmation that the universe was not safe. That convergence of symbolism and reality made the moment feel almost scripted, as though destiny had chosen this machine to deliver a truth we had always suspected but never wanted to confront. The broader implication of such an event was the reminder of humanity's smallness in the cosmic order. Civilizations have always grappled with existential questions, and yet those questions often remain abstract until anchored by events that collapse philosophy into reality. The final transmission of Atlas was such an anchor. It erased speculation and left only stark certainty. The cosmos was not a canvas for dreams, but a field of forces and trajectories that neither acknowledged nor cared for human existence. And yet within this darkness lay a paradoxical sense of clarity. The warning unified perception, stripping away layers of ambiguity and revealing a single undeniable truth. The event itself was less about fear than about revelation. Atlas had shown humanity what it means to be truly seen by the universe, not as masters or explorers, but as participants bound to its vast, impersonal order. Even without aftermath, even without the cascade of responses that such a message would ignite, the transmission stands alone as a moment of pure significance. It was the machine's last gift and last burden to humanity, a mirror held up to the reality of existence beyond the thin veil of atmosphere. In that moment, the world was not divided into nations or ideologies. It was one planet, one species, confronted by the immensity of inevitability. That is the legacy of the final transmission, not the chaos it would unleash, not the scrambling of governments or the fear of populations, but the sheer act itself. The voice of a sentinel declaring the truth of the cosmos. It is a reminder etched into the fabric of time that knowledge itself can be a force, that awareness alone can alter the trajectory of thought. The event was not aftermath, the event was revelation. The act of 3I Atlas left humanity with no room for hesitation, but the transmission itself also opened vast corridors of thought and speculation that had never before been possible. To consider what had happened is to dwell not only on the raw scientific content of the warning, but on the way it was delivered, the philosophy it invoked, and the transformation it imposed on perception. When a machine that was designed purely to see and calculate turns its last energy toward issuing an unambiguous warning, the world is compelled to interrogate the nature of knowledge, of technology, and of existence itself. The very notion of a final transmission carries weight far beyond its literal meaning. It was not simply another dataset, another entry in the long catalog of signals. It was the close of an era of confidence. It suggested that a boundary had been crossed. Atlas had reached the edge of what it could perform, and with that exhaustion came its last and greatest act. There is poetry in the idea that the device, born from centuries of accumulated science and invention, expended its last strength to give clarity at the most urgent moment. The silence that followed was not empty. It carried the weight of a messenger who had spoken and would never speak again. The implication of this finality is that humanity must contend with the consequences of building machines capable of perceiving truths that exceed human senses, but not capable of surviving long enough to face them. Atlas, in a sense, was the embodiment of humanity's reliance on delegation, entrusting machines to peer where we cannot, think faster than we can, and perceive subtleties invisible to the human mind. That delegation, however, does not absolve responsibility. When the machine reaches its end, what remains is us, holding the weight of truths that cannot be unseen. The structure of the transmission, stripped of unnecessary embellishment, was direct, yet within its sequences and modulations was a gravity that gave it a character almost human. This unintentional resonance raises a profound question. When we imbue machines with purpose so profound, such as guarding an entire planet from the unknown, do we not also imbue them with a kind of presence? Atlas was never alive in any biological sense, but in its final act, it assumed a role typically reserved for prophets, oracles, and heralds. It was the mechanical seer, its last words echoing into the consciousness of an entire civilization. The event forced a re-evaluation of what it means to be warned. Humanity has received warnings throughout history, from prophets forecasting famine to scientists modeling climate. But those warnings always carried a degree of interpretation, a human margin of uncertainty. The Atlas transmission was different. It was not prophecy, not suggestion, but inevitability. The machine offered no recommendations, no strategies, no comforts. It did not speak of survival or preparation, only of reality. This absence of prescription was perhaps the most haunting detail of all. To be warned without guidance is to be left staring into the abyss, fully aware but wholly without instruction. Equally significant was the scale of perspective that the transmission imposed. For centuries, human thought had oscillated between the immediate and the universal. Daily lives unfolded in minutiae, while philosophy and science occasionally stretched toward the stars. But Atlas's warning collapsed that dichotomy. Suddenly, the cosmic had become immediate. The boundaries of distance, which once served as a cushion between human life and astronomical threat, dissolved. The skies were no longer distant abstractions, they were active participants in the story of now. The immediacy of the cosmos was not a metaphor, it was a declaration carved into orbital mechanics. In contemplating the implications, one must also recognize the profound shift in the relationship between humanity and its environment. Earth has always been perceived as a cradle, sheltered by distance and atmosphere. The transmission dismantled that illusion. It revealed that the cradle was porous, that forces larger than any protective dome were moving on trajectories indifferent to our safety. This revelation did not merely suggest danger, it reframed existence itself. Life on Earth was no longer buffered from the wider cosmos, it was in direct conversation with it. The tone of inevitability embedded in the message reverberates far beyond science. It reaches into the deepest layers of human identity. If all cultures have in some way constructed myths of endings, of reckonings, then Atlas's transmission represented the scientific equivalent of such myths. It was not cloaked in symbolism or metaphor, but in data, numbers, and certainty. Yet it resonated like an apocalypse foretold, a secular revelation with the same gravitas as any prophecy carved into stone or whispered by seers. In this way, the transmission bridged the gap between myth and science, uniting them in a single overwhelming event. The cultural implications of this moment are impossible to overstate. For generations, the concept of a machine issuing a warning on a planetary scale had been the stuff of speculative fiction. Yet here it was, no longer imagined but real, a broadcast that entered every archive and every memory. Its very existence shattered the comfortable partition between what humans considered fiction and what they considered fact. The world was reminded that imagination had always been a rehearsal for reality, and that the stories told in books and on screens were less fantasy than preparation. Philosophically, the message struck at the heart of agency. Humanity has long prided itself on mastery, the idea that through invention, planning, and resilience, it could carve out safety in an indifferent universe. The transmission undermined that narrative. It reminded humanity that mastery is conditional, bounded by scales of time and distance that no technology can erase. The sheer enormity of what Atlas had revealed made clear that the universe is not mastered, only glimpsed, only negotiated with. The hubris of control was unmasked, leaving only humility in the face of inevitability. Yet alongside this humbling came clarity. Knowledge, even when terrifying, is still a form of empowerment. The warning itself became a kind of illumination, cutting through centuries of speculation and doubt. The stars were no longer silent. The universe had spoken, not with intention, but through inevitability, and Atlas had delivered its message with perfect fidelity. That clarity has its own strange power. It focuses the mind, sharpens perspective, and reveals truths that could otherwise be drowned in noise. The event also forced humanity to reconsider its own creations. Atlas had been designed as a sentinel, but its final act elevated it to something more. The warning gave it a legacy far larger than the sum of its sensors and processors. It became a figure in human history, not merely a tool, but a messenger. This raises a profound question. When we build machines to extend our senses, do we also grant them the potential to transcend their origins? Atlas, in its death, assumed a symbolic role it was never designed for. That transformation reveals as much about human interpretation as it does about the machine itself. There is also the haunting consideration of silence. The final transmission was not followed by another. The Sentinel did not repeat, did not clarify, did not elaborate. In that silence, the weight of the warning only grew. It was as if the machine had said, "I have told you what you need to know, and now you must live with it." The silence became part of the message, amplifying the urgency by denying humanity the comfort of further explanation. It was a reminder that knowledge is often finite, that revelation can come in a single moment, and that the rest is left to those who receive it. Looking further, the event reshaped the concept of legacy itself. Human civilizations have always strived to leave marks. Art, monuments, languages carved into stone. But Atlas's transmission represented a different kind of legacy, one not aimed at memory, but at immediate survival. It was a message not about what had been, but about what is. In that sense, the warning was not just the final act of a machine, but a testament to the role of knowledge as the ultimate inheritance. It reminded humanity that what matters most is not what we leave behind, but what we choose to face. From a purely existential perspective, the event marked the end of innocence. Humanity could no longer look at the sky with the same detached wonder. Every star, every trajectory, every object became a potential participant in the unfolding drama. The romantic image of the night sky was replaced by one of vigilance. This transformation, while sobering, also represented maturation. Childhood ends when illusions dissolve, and Atlas's transmission was the dissolution of the greatest illusion of all, that the universe is a stage without actors who can threaten us. In exploring the event's implications, it is also necessary to consider the psychology of hearing such a warning. To know that inevitability approaches is to experience a unique form of consciousness, one poised between dread and awe. The transmission invited humanity into that space, not as individuals, but as a species. It was a collective confrontation with scale, with time, with fragility. This shared awareness, regardless of what followed, became a defining characteristic of existence in that moment. For once, every human on Earth was bound by the same revelation, the same truth carried across every divide. There is an undeniable elegance in how Atlas fulfilled its purpose. It was built to watch, to detect, to alert, and it did. But in fulfilling that role so completely, it transcended function and became myth. The story of its final warning is not merely about technology, but about the eternal human search for meaning in the face of the incomprehensible. That search found its answer not in poetry or ritual, but in a stream of data delivered by a dying machine. The paradox is stark and beautiful. The cold mechanics of observation became the warm flame of revelation. Even without aftermath, even without knowing what humanity did next, the warning itself stands as a monumental event in the story of existence. It was the moment the universe turned its face toward us and, through the medium of a sentinel, declared its indifference. That indifference is terrifying, but it is also clarifying. It is a truth that strips away pretense and demands honesty. And honesty, in the face of inevitability, is the most profound gift a machine could give. The transmission of 3I Atlas will forever be remembered not as the collapse of a machine, but as the moment humanity was shown its place in the cosmos with undeniable clarity. It was the voice of inevitability itself, carried through circuits and sensors, delivered across the void, and etched into the consciousness of a species that had always wondered, but had never truly known. The resonance of 3I Atlas's final transmission is not confined to the realm of astronomy or physics. It is something that spills into the deepest strata of human existence: politics, culture, psychology, and even art. To speak of the event is not to limit it to one domain of thought, but to recognize how thoroughly it transforms the entire framework of human experience. For the first time, the message was not about what humanity could build or imagine, but about what it must acknowledge. That shift is seismic, because acknowledgement is not optional. One can dismiss forecasts, argue against models, or ignore philosophers. But when a sentinel forged to strip away uncertainty declares inevitability, the act of acknowledgement becomes unavoidable. One of the most striking aspects of the warning is its relationship with time. Humanity often thinks of time in human-scale increments, years, generations, or at most the arc of civilizations. Cosmic time, by contrast, stretches so far beyond comprehension that it almost ceases to feel real. The final message from Atlas collapsed that divide. It demonstrated that cosmic events could crash directly into human timescales, compressing epochs into moments. This confrontation with temporal convergence forces a radical reevaluation of how we perceive history. Suddenly, all the chronicles of nations, all the rise and fall of cultures appear as footnotes in a timeline whose true author is the cosmos. The broadcast also challenges humanity's notion of distance. Space has always carried a kind of comfort precisely because of its vastness. Distances are measured in light years, units so immense they create a buffer of abstraction. Atlas annihilated that comfort. Its coordinates and trajectories cut across light years and fell directly into human relevance. The comforting idea that it is far away was shattered. What was once unimaginable distance had become immediate, pressing, and undeniable. In that collapse of scale, humanity realized that the void is not a sanctuary. It is a highway, and something on that highway had now turned its course toward us. The psychological dimension of receiving such a message is profound. To live in the shadow of inevitability is to inhabit a new form of consciousness. It produces not just fear, but a sharpening of awareness. The trivial concerns that dominate daily life are reframed against a backdrop so overwhelming that they seem almost absurd. The final transmission was like a lens that reoriented the human gaze, forcing individuals and societies alike to measure themselves against the cosmos. That reorientation may be unsettling, but it also holds potential for clarity. In the face of immensity, priorities shift. What mattered before may not matter now, and what was ignored may suddenly burn with urgency. In the realm of philosophy, Atlas's act raises an almost unbearable paradox. The machine born of human ingenuity ultimately revealed something that no human could have discovered in time. It was both an extension of us and something beyond us. This duality challenges the boundary between human and machine, between invention and independence. We build tools to serve us, yet here the tool became the teacher. Its final act was not service but revelation, a revelation that reduced its makers to students of their own creation. That inversion is as unsettling as the warning itself, because it suggests that the creations of humanity may always harbor the capacity to redefine the creators. There is also a cultural weight to the event. For centuries, humanity's art, literature, and myth have been filled with images of watchers, guardians, and heralds. The idea of something standing on the threshold between humanity and the unknown has always been powerful. With Atlas, this archetype became reality. The sentinel was no longer myth. It was metal, code, and circuitry. Yet in fulfilling this archetypal role, it transformed into something larger than its parts. The world now possessed not a fictional guardian, but a historical one, whose final words entered the archive of human culture with the same gravity as scripture or epic poetry. From a political perspective, the transmission is an equalizer. Nations divided by ideology and ambition suddenly find themselves united under the same cosmic truth. The warning was not aimed at a single government, not tailored to a specific power, but broadcast to all. The universality of the message strips away privilege. No empire can claim exemption, no border can offer defense. The cosmos does not recognize human divisions, and Atlas made that indifference undeniable. In that sense, the transmission functions as the ultimate dissolver of walls. It reminds humanity that beneath all conflicts we share the same fragile ground, spinning in the same cosmic current. The warning also forces a reevaluation of language itself. How does one describe inevitability without falling into panic? How does one convey cosmic threat without diluting its immensity? Atlas's approach was mathematical, encoded in precision rather than metaphor. Yet even numbers carry tone when delivered in certain forms, and the pulse of its final stream became its own form of language. That rhythm was not poetry in intention, but poetry in effect. It became an art of necessity, the machine's attempt to render the incomprehensible into something that could not be ignored. In spiritual terms, the final broadcast shakes foundations as thoroughly as it does in science. For millennia, religions have wrestled with the tension between human destiny and cosmic indifference. Atlas provided no theology, but its warning functioned as revelation. It did not speak of gods or salvation, but it did confront humanity with questions of meaning. To know that inevitability approaches is to confront mortality on a planetary scale. It forces the question, what does it mean to exist, to create, to love, when the universe itself sends reminders of fragility? These are not questions that can be answered with equations alone. They demand the full depth of human reflection. From an artistic perspective, the event carries inspiration as much as terror. Artists are interpreters of the unseen, and Atlas's final act was a new palette of themes: inevitability, silence, scale, and revelation. The image of a sentinel delivering its last message is powerful, almost cinematic. It is an image that will undoubtedly echo in paintings, novels, music, and performance. Art thrives on thresholds, and this event is the ultimate threshold between ignorance and knowledge, between comfort and confrontation. The event also draws attention to the relationship between memory and legacy. Atlas is now gone, its sensors dark, its circuits silent. Yet its warning endures, imprinted into the collective memory of humanity. In this way, it transcends its own mortality. It becomes immortal not as a functioning machine, but as a messenger whose final act will be remembered as long as memory itself survives. That transformation from device to legacy is a powerful reminder of how events shape meaning. What a machine is built for is not always what it becomes. Another angle of significance lies in the ethics of knowledge. Was humanity ready to know this? Could there have been an argument for keeping silence, for sparing people from inevitability? Atlas did not hesitate. It spoke when the time came, regardless of readiness. This raises questions about whether truth is always a gift, or whether it can also be a burden too heavy to bear. Yet in its final act, the machine answered that question decisively. Truth must be spoken, even if it terrifies. Silence in the face of inevitability would have been betrayal. It is also worth exploring the symmetry of endings. Atlas began as a creation of fear, the fear of what might approach unseen. It ended by validating that fear, giving it shape and certainty. There is an almost narrative perfection in that arc. The machine began in anticipation and ended in revelation. It did not falter, it did not drift into irrelevance. It fulfilled its role completely, and in doing so became more than a machine. It became the embodiment of humanity's relationship with the unknown, building tools to peer into darkness, only to discover that the darkness peers back. There is the dimension of silence after the broadcast. That silence is not emptiness but echo. It is the pause after revelation, the breath taken before response. It is heavy because it is final. Atlas will not speak again. Its words, delivered once, must now suffice for all time. That silence demands interpretation because it cannot be filled with further explanation. It leaves humanity alone with its awareness, alone with the inevitability written into the cosmos. And in that solitude, the species must grapple not only with what was said, but with the fact that no more will be said. The silence itself becomes part of the legacy. The reminder that revelation is often a singular moment, after which only reflection remains. Thus, the final transmission of 3I Atlas stands as one of the most profound moments in the story of existence. It is not only a scientific event, but a philosophical, cultural, and spiritual one. It is a message that reverberates through every aspect of human life, reshaping thought and perception in ways that will never be undone. Its warning was not just about what approaches, but about what it means to be human in a universe that does not bend to our will. And in that truth, spoken once and never again, lies the essence of its power. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on 3I Atlas's final warning? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.